Obviously the best case scenario is when somebody is struggling with their mental health and they're aware of it, they're picking up on it, and they want to do something about it. They reach out for support in whatever form that takes, and then they move into, the steps to recover and regenerate, like you said. But how often does it happen where, let's say it's your friends or family that will be concerned and that will reach out for additional support? I don't know if there's like such a thing as like intervention. I'm thinking like for a drug intervention, but is there like such a thing as like mental health interventions, or how do people have that conversation if they're noticing their loved ones are kind of not doing well, their behavior's changing, but it's like, how do you approach that? How do you do that well?
I think there are probably two main avenues, and one's something I can relate to because it happens. The other one is something I can't relate to, but I'm aware of it. I think GPs, general practitioners in the UK, see an awful lot of people with mental health issues, and what they would say is that the majority of those people present with physical symptoms. So they'll come to the doctor and they'll say something like, I'm not sleeping, or I'm not eating properly, or I'm forgetful, but they'll describe something that they consider to be a physical problem or physical concern, and the GP will pick that up as a mental issue, but they won't present with the mental issue, they will present with a physical symptom.
Interesting.
So I think that's quite interesting in itself. I think for people like me in therapy, people need to self-present. So you can't present somebody else. So you might get a call from a lady that says, my husband needs some help.
Right.
Can I refer him to you for help?
Right.
My response to that would always be, yeah, absolutely, I want to help, but he needs to call me, he needs to come and see me, and he needs to make it clear that he's happy to be helped. You can't refer on his behalf, because you're not really going to build a therapeutic relationship with somebody who doesn't want to be there.
Right. It has to feel consensual.
Yeah. 100%.
And I guess change happens when you want change yourself, right? What would you say?
Or you're ready to talk about it. It's the same with things like alcoholism, isn't it? You can't really present for help until you admit there's a problem.
That's interesting that you say that, because we talk about, or I've been talking a lot about how people who don't know they're realizing they're struggling, but what if they do and they actually just don't feel ready to, like it's the can of worms thing. Like, there's kind of an issue, but it's almost like if I just keep ignoring it, maybe it can go away. Like, how do you have that conversation with people who just feel like if they ever take that step, it's just everything's going to come crashing down?
I don't think you can direct somebody to that. I think you can just have the conversation with them. So it's like very often what people talk about is the consequences. So they might talk about, I'm using drink too much, or I'm using recreational drugs too much, or I'm getting angry all the time, or whatever. But they're the consequences of the mental health issues that they're flying around. But they're happier to talk about how they're dealing with something. So it's the consequences of them not feeling great, of them having very low self-esteem, or wherever it is going on inside. But you can't pinpoint that for them. I think it's about they've got to be able to talk about the thing in the round, if you like, and ultimately they've got to start to discover that for themselves. You can't pinpoint them to the answer.
How is it as a therapist where you're sitting there? I guess like it's a very careful dance in a way, right? Where you're there, you're the expert to help, but I guess there's only so much you can really do. You have to, I don't know, I guess like trust and respect that your patient is gonna, or the person that you're speaking to is gonna be able to, I don't know, figure it out for themselves, or like find the answers. Like that must be hard, no? To like draw that line in the sand and like just keep behind it? Because I'm sure you do care about the well-being of your
people
patients.
make their own decisions, don't they? People have their own perspectives, and clearly I still have, my views or opinions, which I would keep to myself. But you do see clients that have very difficult situations, and they identify those situations, and they share some really, really awful experiences with you, but ultimately they decide not to make those changes. So they could be in very abusive relationships, but despite that they still deeply love the partner, and they're not prepared to leave the relationship. But that means that they are prepared in some way to carry on taking the abuse, and we can talk through that, but ultimately it's their decision. They decide what they want to do, and privately I might think that they shouldn't continue with the relationship, but if that's what they choose to do, then that's what they do, isn't it? I don't control anybody in the therapeutic relationship. They're in control, and they make their own decisions.
So how would you, in your words, describe your role? Like, what is it at the end of the day that, like, even in the times where you can't necessarily control the outcome, like, how do you feel, how would you word your purpose, if you will, in that experience, in that relationship?
Create a safe environment. Be somebody who's prepared to listen. Give people an environment where they can be really, really frank and honest and not feel judged. I think enable people to get some perspective in terms of what's happening, and then create an environment where people can explore options and possibilities, because that has to come from them. They have to be able to work out something that perhaps in the first session is wholly unthinkable, perhaps by the fifth or sixth session is something that's a real possibility. As they gather confidence around, well, maybe I could do that, or maybe I could do the other. So I think it's just being that catalyst to allow people to explore in this kind of safe environment where anything's possible. And you can maybe be a version of you that you can't be in wider society, because you don't feel judged, or you don't feel that you've said anything wrong.
So for those who are maybe considering seeking counseling or seeking some sort of a talk therapy, what's the process like? Is it very involved? Like, is it just an easy phone call? I think sometimes the first step is always the scariest one, or the one that feels like the biggest deal.
Yeah, I think it's much simpler than people think. It is literally pick the phone up, arrange a session, come along. I think I always say to people before sessions, don't overthink it. I think people often feel like they have to be very chronological, tell it in the order that it is, whereas I always say to people, just blurt it out, just get it off your chest, just let it come out however it comes out.
So there's no homework or preparedness?
There's no homework, no. I mean, there are some forms of therapy that do give homework, and people tend to be quite negative about that. Some people, I think, will turn up to a first session and it's just this massive release, and they just let everything go, and you can see that they just feel great because there's this stuff that's been building up for years, and they just get it off their chest straight away, and that's really, really positive. But equally, there are just as many people who turn up and it just takes time. So they let a little bit go, but they're quite reticent to let go. Maybe it takes time to build a therapeutic relationship until they are prepared to feel that they can share, they feel safe, or they don't feel judged. So some people are more circumspect, other people are not. So the way that people react varies, I think, massively. I think women are much more likely to share earlier than men. Men are much, much more reticent to share, but that isn't always the case.
Yeah, what's in terms of differences between men and women? Because I know we tend to, I don't know, I guess maybe the stereotype of women are more emotional, so they are able to talk about their feelings more. I think men, for a long time, it's been, they're more like the suppressors. If it's not bleeding, it's not hurt. What's the, like, do you notice a big difference in terms of your, like, men and women?
Yeah, I think on a level, women are much more likely to share in their friendship groups. So they tend to have stronger support networks. So they've certainly shared aspects of what they're going to talk about in therapy, perhaps with a few trusted friends. Men typically do less of that. So they might hang out with groups of guys and go for beer after work and stuff, but they don't talk about feelings, and they certainly don't talk about mental health. So that tends to be, it's quite often the first time they've ever talked about this stuff for them in the therapy session. It will be, this is the first time I've mentioned this. So I've not mentioned this to friends, I've not mentioned this to family, and quite often not mentioned it to loved ones.
Right. Why is that, though?
I think it's sociological, isn't it? I think it's the way that men and women are brought up differently. Men are often brought up and told, boys don't cry, and so they are taught to hide their emotions. And I think it's quite difficult then in later life to decide to counteract everything they've been taught about, stiff up a lip and putting on a brave face, to suddenly, I'm going to start sharing my emotions.
But just to, like, really make it clear, talking, any kind of, like, therapeutic activity, that benefits everyone, right? Men, women, that you've talked about stuff before or not. I wonder if, I talk about this a lot in my personal life. I feel like, men are definitely underserved in a lot of ways. I think we don't talk enough about how men today can struggle with things like mental health. And I've noticed more and more, I know they've been around for a long time, but like men groups, things like that. What do you think of that?
Men groups I think are amazing.
Yeah.
I've got clients that go, and I think they serve two purposes. I think they serve a really great purpose that people actually can just go and talk in a group where they don't feel judged, because the environment is that everybody else has got something to share. I think people often go along and probably don't speak for the first couple of weeks, but then when they hear everybody else, they think, actually, this is okay, I can join in. But the other thing I pick up is people just love that environment. So even though they might have then gotten something from the process, they like to still go along because actually they feel like they can be of help to other people.
Right.
So they recognise that I was once that person that came along here and felt really vulnerable, and it was really scary. But actually, if I can be part of helping somebody else now, that actually helps my therapy. So it becomes quite a sort of cyclical process, if you like.
Yeah.
So I really, really like that.
That's very important, isn't it? Because like you were saying, it's a part of that cycle. There's helping yourself just very, selfishly, but also helping yourself through helping others. How it allows you almost like the ability to step in as your own example to look up to, right? And really embody that for somebody else. And then, that obviously gives you a boost.
Yeah, there's sort of a sense of, you get a lot of alcoholics, don't you, who go to AA meetings, and 10 years after they're dry, they still go into AA meetings because, A, they want to help, but I think it kind of reinforces stuff for them. It's still good therapy, sort of 10 years on, if you like.
What's, would you say that it's something that you recommend complementary to therapy, or would you say that these little moments, like joining a men's group, or, joining a group where you can find a sense of community, or, for lack of a better word, brotherhood for men, sisterhood for women, or anything else, that can also just start having an impact on helping you feel a little bit more balanced and supported, no?
I'd probably say there's two things. I think there's one, it's always good to talk about anything, isn't it? Mental health included, but it's always good to talk. But it's also good to break down that stigma about how other people react when you talk about your mental health. So I get quite a lot of clients who'll come along and they'll build the confidence to talk to me about their mental health, but then they'll start to talk about, but what would happen if I talked to my partner about this, or what if I talked to my parents about this? And they quite often start from a place which is, I couldn't ever do that, that's just not something that's conceivable, to the point where they actually build the confidence to do it. And I'd say 99 times out of 100, when they do it, they're amazed by how it's received. It's sort of, they get empathy back, and actually everyone's fine with it. But they start from a place which is, people just won't get this, or people will react really badly to it. But we do find, and I suppose as much as we can spread this message, when we talk about mental health, people are okay with it.
I'm thinking about something one of my line managers back in my agency days, Niall, would always remind me is like, don't suffer in silence. And I think that that's something we tend to do without even realizing. We don't want to bother people. I mean, forget the judgment for a second. We don't want to be a burden. I hear that a lot. People don't want to burden somebody else with their problems. Oh, you're going through a lot worse right now. I didn't want to burden you. I guess it's that would aggravate the problem, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so I think people come on several levels, don't they? So I don't want to share this because the other person can't handle it, or I want to protect them. Yeah, so there's that caring aspect of it.
But that can be projection, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's also that I don't want to share this because people will see me differently. But then I think there's this whole naive thing about, are we really that good that we could be in a relationship with somebody, have a deep mental health issue, and not share that, and not think the other person doesn't know? You can't take a whole chunk of your personality and hide that and expect the other person not to be able to see it. We're just not that good at acting, are we?
Right.
It's like when somebody does eventually have that conversation that says, I suffer from this, the other person goes, yeah, whatever, because they already know. But it's just become this unspoken thing in the relationship.
Like they're waiting for you to bring it up first sometimes.
Because it's intrusive for them to mention it, but they absolutely know something's going on. Well, why wouldn't they?
There's I'm thinking about how, we think about how to be a supportive friend, how to be a supportive partner, how to be a supportive colleague, family member, what have you. And when you're the one sitting in the place where you're struggling, you don't want to be a burden on other people. I can't remember who said this. I watched this talk recently about mental health and reaching out. And it was sharing the perspective that you have to remember that people that love you want the opportunity to love you. And if it's not for yourself, do it for them. Don't prevent them. Don't take away the opportunity for them to support you. Sometimes you're gonna be able to create even more connection and more relief in a relationship when you're sharing, hey, I'm not doing well and I need support, I need help. If you're really thinking about it, most of the time, if you just put yourself in the shoes of if your friend comes to you that you love and is telling you something's going on, you're like, thank you for telling me. I'm so happy to be there for you. I feel very privileged that you're allowing me to be there for you. That's a wonderful gift that you're giving me. So I think sometimes I love that perspective because it's something to remind ourselves that when we're struggling, we have to remember that the people who love us, you're doing a disservice to yourself by not reaching out, but you're also doing a disservice to them because they likely would love the opportunity to support you and be there. It's a lot less burdensome than how we imagine our struggles to be.
I think sometimes I have that conversation with people where they say, I don't share this particular thing with friends or family or whatever. And I sometimes say to them, but if it was the other way around, how would you feel if your friend didn't tell you this or tell you that? And they say, well, it'll be awful because they're denying me the opportunity to help. But that's what you're doing to them.
It's back to the where we so easily preach, but we have a hard time putting in practice things that, it's kind of like, they say, how to talk to yourself like you would talk to your friend. We tend to be a lot more negative to ourselves than we ever would to somebody that we love.
Yeah, that voice in our head is the nastiest voice we know, isn't it? You know, when we have lots of conversations with ourselves that go, pull yourself together, just get on with it. But if a friend asked us for advice in the same situation, we would never say that to them, would we? No. We would say, take a minute, it's okay. We'd be very, very caring and kind, wouldn't we? But we don't talk to ourselves like that.
I sometimes, I struggle a lot with how to support, people who are maybe too proud or just not used to or uncomfortable at the idea of talking about their struggles and their challenges. I'm thinking of, let's say, I've had this conversation so many times with my stepdad, who's very old school, and he'll joke a lot about, if it's not bleeding, it ain't hurt. So he's very traditional in that sense, and he's the first person that you can come to when it comes to needing support. If you need help, he's always going to be there and be a shoulder to cry on, lend an ear, and really listen. But I think he's the last person to almost do himself that kindness too, in reaching out and talking about what he goes through, because again, there's a lot of pride. You want to, especially if you consider yourself the leader of a family unit, you want to be that strong. You want to be that strong person. So it's kind of we have this association that admitting your struggles is a sign of weakness. Do you think that's that's a very old school way to think, but do you think that's still something that manifests today in our younger generation too?
Perhaps less so in younger generations, but there's still aspects of it, isn't there? I think we create roles for ourselves in society. We create roles for ourselves within families, don't we? We create roles for ourselves within friendship groups, and we become a particular type of person. And what you're describing there is we create this role where we're there for other people, but we've created this image of we're big and strong and we don't need any help.
Yeah, we're just not here for ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I think the things that you've talked about, things like men's groups, are good, because they change that dynamic completely, don't they? It's all bets are off, and actually we can all share here. But sometimes around our loved ones and our friends and our family, we've created this image that we are impregnable, and it's then quite difficult in that environment to take any help or even expose any kind of vulnerability, isn't it? Because we see vulnerability as a weakness, don't we? We don't see it as a strength. No.
But it is actually, I feel in theory, people do say how, showing your vulnerable side is a great testament to a strength of character, because, that is part of being human. And yeah, I think there's something I really respect people who can speak on their own challenges and still saying, look, and here I am though, still showing up for myself and showing up for others, and I'm going through shit, and it's not perfect, and that's kind of, I think those are great leaders. I'm seeing that more and more, especially in a business world too, where you have CEOs and leaders of big companies who are coming out, and they are huge advocates of mental health. And I think it's great to see these examples of people who are showing a lot of strength in admitting that you're not always strong 24/7. That's okay. It's not, but anyways.
Yeah, but it doesn't go, does it, with the construct previously of what chief execs and people look like? They always had to be big and strong and powerful and, like you say, impregnable. But actually, they're all human beings, and actually, they've always had their vulnerabilities. They've just not displayed that because it wasn't seen as part of what good leadership looked like. Whereas you're right, it's starting to change that now, isn't it? That leadership is about being vulnerable. Leadership is about diversity and difference, isn't it? So there's a sort of different focus, I suppose, as time goes by.
I really liked, I've obviously, we've been working together for the last 9-10 months, and in my life, I've done my own therapy programs, and I've interacted and worked with a lot of other therapists, mostly women. I liked having you on because, you know, you're a man who, you know, you stand tall, you stand strong, and you're able to talk about this stuff. You know, I think again, we have this association that mental health, talking about feelings, it's all women centric, and just, I think, shifting a little bit how we represent, like who we're choosing as representatives of like leaders in mental health, I think is really important, because, you know, mental health struggles, ups and downs, this is something that everybody can relate to. And I think seeing somebody that you can look up to, or that looks a little bit more like you, or that's in a similar industry as you, I think is really important. It helps break down those barriers that we have. I don't know, or I think like maybe it's like a marketing thing too. I don't know, like in my head, I'm seeing men's group, which again, I'm like huge fan of, I think is a great thing. I wonder if it's that it's just not marketed as therapy that just makes it more comfortable. You know, because it's not therapy group, it's not men's therapy, it's men group, it's brotherhood, you know, and it's almost like injected in that are like therapeutic moments, therapeutic opportunities.
Yeah, it's interesting you said the word marketing. I think there's a massive difference between a psychotherapist and a counsellor, isn't there? I think
Right.
counsellor feels softer. I think it's easier for people.
Because you go by both, though, right?
Yeah, but I would always say counsellor first, I think. Definitely, I think amongst the therapy groups, there are a lot more female therapists than male. I don't know what the percentages are, but I say it's probably in the realms of like 90-10.
Okay,
So
wow,
that
that's
extreme.
significant. Yeah.
From my experiences. Certainly when I set up my practice, my assumption, wrongly, was that I would get a lot of male clients, because males would be attracted to males. And to some extent that's true, but I get an awful lot of female clients as well. And if I ever ask them, you know, why have you chosen a male counsellor, it's interesting, they very often say, because I've got loads of girlfriends that I talk to, and I was really interested in the male perspective.
Interesting.
Because I don't typically get that. But there probably is a need for more male counsellors out there, because I suspect the trend over time will be, you know, we talked about this earlier, didn't we, that the prevalence of mental health issues is almost double in females as it is in males in the official statistics. But we suspect that's not true. It's just that males aren't presenting in as bigger numbers right now, but we kind of hope that trend will change.
Right. And
over the next 10, 20 years, we will see probably as many men present for therapy as we do females.
And, you know, if somebody is feels like therapy is a bit too much of a jump, we're hearing a lot of, life coaches. Life coach, you know, like you were saying, counselor, sometimes a bit softer, life coach. I mean, I guess has a very similar impact, or?
Hard to say because I'm not a life coach, but I think in the commoditized world that we live in, people like instant solutions, don't they? And I think there's got to be some realistic aspirations about how therapy helps you. You know, if you've been battling with something for the last 20 years, it's not really realistic to come along for a therapy session and think, well, 3 sessions of this and I'm going to be fine.
I'm fixed.
That's just not going to happen. I think quite often people reach out to coaching because they're looking to address a specific issue. So I'm not happy at work, or I'm not getting promoted, or I don't know, my interpersonal relationships in work are perhaps not what I would want them to be. And so that's a fix. But quite often behind that, I think quite often there are deeper issues. You know, I see lots of people that come to me and they have work-related issues, but then they feel trapped.
Right.
You know, they might feel that, you know, I'm in a profession, I've done that profession for 20 years, I earn quite a lot of money, but I don't like it, I don't enjoy it, it doesn't do anything for me, it's making me depressed, but I don't feel I've got any alternatives because this is what I do. And if I was to give this up and go and do something else, I'd perhaps earn a third of what I earn right now, and I have a mortgage and I have a family. So I get a lot of people who feel very, very trapped.
Mm. And how do you help that?
Ultimately, they need to go through a process of actually perspective, because, you know, you might be working as an accountant and there are still 101 other things that you can do. So it's about how much appetite you have for change. But I don't think it's sustainable, is it? If you're 40 years of age and you're doing something that you really do dislike, can you really dig in until you're 65 and do that for another 25 years?
Yeah.
I think it's about understanding that that's not something that's an option.
I mean, that's probably even more depressing than currently being in a depressing job, is to...
The prospect of it for the next
doing
25
this,
years,
yeah.
it's just unthinkable. And so that's quite a long process to change people's perspective and start to get them to explore what are the other options, because there has to be another option.
I know we talk about quick fixes in our society from, you know, just the reality that we're in a very... we live in a world where, like, a lot of things are very easily accessible. You know, we live for instant gratification. I'm sure that's also one of the reasons why prescribed medication is the only prescribed method to address anxiety and depression a lot of times. I mean, I'm not too familiar with how it is in the UK, but I know back home in North America, that's kind of usually like the go-to. It's kind of like, well, just take these pills for the rest of your life and you'll be fine. That's just it's fixing the symptoms. It's like not fixing the root cause, like, you know, setting new patterns, better systems, better behaviors, better habits. But I guess, like, I guess there's no real window of time to start seeing the benefits of talk therapy. Or would you say, like, people usually after a couple of sessions? I'm sure it's not a one and done thing, but
I think it varies massively. I think the very experience of turning up the first time and just letting everything go can have a massive impact on some people. Obviously, as I've said, some people don't share that quickly. I think some people go through therapy and make some really sustainable changes to their lives. So they might change their job, they might change their relationship, they might change their friendship network. The more change they make, I think the more sustainable the solution very often. I think the trap that some people fall into is they have an underlying reason why they're unhappy, they have an underlying reason that's impacting their mental health. They come for therapy, they talk about it, but they don't really make changes in their lives. So they might take some time out from work, but then they go back to work, and they go back to work in 70, 80 hours a week. And then it's not surprising that the changes aren't sustained. They kind of end up going back to where they were. So there's no simple answer to that question. I think if you come into therapy and you try to address your mental health issues, the more changes you make, typically, the more likely it is to be sustained.
I guess that's where it plays nicely when they say, you know, therapy is work. Sure, sometimes I guess it can feel very heavy, sometimes not necessarily, but it's awareness is one thing, and I can't remember where I got this quote from, but, you know, awareness without changed behavior is just manipulation. You can say, I'm aware, I know, but, like, at the end of the day, if you just don't really do anything about it, then you're kind of kidding yourself and sustaining a system that's just not helpful or sustainable.
I think it's quite similar, isn't it, to if you were hugely overweight and you decide to go to Slimming World or whatever it's called for 20 weeks and you lose an awful lot of weight, but then at the end of those 20 weeks you just go back to the diet you were on prior to joining Slimming World, well, your weight's going to go back to where it was, isn't it? And I think the therapeutic journey is quite similar. If you're going to make some changes, you've got to sustain those changes, and those changes, if you continue to work on them and evolve them, they will serve you well. But if you just go back to wherever you did prior to seeking therapy, well, you'll just get the same answers, won't you? So it has to be a journey of discovery, I think, for most people.
I think it's really helpful to, I guess, hear it from the horse's mouth, or, you know, kind of be able to reveal a bit of the behind the scenes of what really goes on, like what therapy is really like. I appreciate that you are very focused on like humanizing the process too. It's not your sort of sterile therapy consult that I think a lot of people sort of imagine. I have a couple of questions if you're good to answer them, just to like demystify a little bit what goes on behind the scenes. So therapists are humans too. You say it many times. I think you even say it on your website, like your own personal experiences have helped you help other people. Is it so? I mean, I guess it wouldn't be uncommon for a therapist to have their own therapist, because you have your own things to talk about, right? And to offload.
So I think I think it's true to say all therapists that actively practice are in therapy.
Yeah.
Because you kind of need to have that counterbalance. So we don't just...
You got to practice what you preach too.
What you preach, but you've also got to have that counterbalance to kind of go away and talk about some stuff, because clearly there are things that we experience in that therapeutic room that impact us too.
Yeah.
So yeah, we are always in therapy and we always talk to somebody.
Yeah.
So we have our own sort of supervisory techniques where we talk about our own issues that might be coming up, but we also then anonymously talk about particular cases sometimes what might be concerning us, or we just need to kind of bounce that stuff off other people.
Yeah, keeps it kosher. And I've heard this many times before, where people just say, oh, you know, your therapist is paid to care. They're paid to listen. Like, you know, it's a little fake. What would you say to that?
I think it's easy to say that, but I think when you work with somebody in that environment, I think you do develop quite a close bond with them very, very quickly. I think it'd be wrong to say that you always love all your clients, because sometimes working with your clients can be really challenging and it can be really, really difficult. But no, I wouldn't ever say. I've never seen examples of it. I've never felt it, that it's felt fake in any way. If it sort of started to feel like that, I think it's the right thing to do is to then break with that client and refer them kind of on to somebody else. And
so in terms of like, because we hear that a lot, like, you know, finding the right therapist, the right chemistry, you know, depending on whatever serves to that person in the moment. Is it easy, would you say, to find you know, a therapist that you're matched, or a counselor that you're matched with that works? Does it take a few times? Like, what's that process like on average, would you say, for people?
I think it's like any matching process, isn't it? I think it's a trial and error thing, but I always say to people, let's have one conversation, let's see if it works. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for me, let's have a really open and honest conversation about it.
You usually have like a free consultation, something like a 15
free session up front. But also I always say to clients, you know, if you don't feel comfortable with the therapist you've got, change it.
Right.
You know, don't settle until you've found something where you feel really comfortable or it really works for you. You know, there's not a choice of one out there. Just try a few until it feels right.
Yeah. So would you say that most of the time when people say, oh, you know, like I don't you know, mesh well with my therapist, or I don't know if it's worked for me, it could be also a case of it's just not the right match, because every therapist has their own approach or style, right?
Yeah, it's a dynamic situation, isn't it? We've all got different styles. We all bond with people in slightly different ways. If a therapeutic relationship doesn't feel really safe, or you don't feel really comfortable, I'd always say to somebody, change it. Don't try and force it because you've signed up with this person and you feel obligated to go along. No, don't do that. Change it.
Okay. Well, that's really good, because I think it can feel a bit discouraged when somebody, you know, gathers all their courage for that first hard step of like reaching out, and then the first counselor you connect with, just a bit of a dud, and then you think, oh, okay, like it's not for me. So it would be just to like try a couple, like have conversations with a couple of counselors, and like you might find a good match.
And it doesn't need to be personalised, does it? You know, some clients don't match with a counsellor, some counsellors don't match with the client. That's the nature of human interaction, isn't it? It doesn't make a bad client or a bad therapist. it's just not a great match. Well, you know what? Be grown up about it and just change it.
And so, obviously, we are very accustomed, again, TV, movies, in person, one-on-one, in real life, the couch, the chair. But actually now what we're seeing more and more is like virtual therapy. Do you feel like that? I mean, what do you think of that? Do you feel like it provides very similar benefits? Are there pros? Are there cons? I
think it's interesting. I think prior to the pandemic, where I think all the counselling I'd done up until that point had been face-to-face, I probably would have been a critic and would have said things like, it'd be really hard to get a deep, meaningful therapeutic relationship through a computer.
Yeah.
Then there was a period of time during the pandemic when that was all we could do. And I think now, I'd still say I would prefer face-to-face therapy. I think it probably is better. But I do think...
Why?
I think you just get more of a feel for the person. I think it's slightly more engaging. But I would say is that online counselling is 1,000 times better than I ever thought it would be.
Really?
Yeah, I think, and it probably is the way forward. And I think there's another unique one, which is I've had a couple of clients who are incredibly nervous about the process, and they found that actually not having the camera on and it just being a voice thing has really, really helped.
Interesting. Okay, because my my stepmom is she's a therapist, a psychiatrist, and she's struggled with this virtual thing, pros and cons. And she one of her requirements though is to always have the camera on, I think, because you can read body language and different cues, which because we what is it we communicate, 90% of how we communicate is nonverbal. But I guess that's a very good entry point for somebody who's, I don't know, more shy or...
Yeah, so where we've not had the camera on has never been at my request, it's been at the client's request. But if that's what the client wants, then who am I to say you've got to turn your camera on? So if they want that, if that anonymity kind of helps a little bit, then what's wrong with that? Because I often think, well, is that a choice between them having therapy and not having therapy? So
yeah, that's true.
Is it ideal? Probably not. But if it works for a client, then that's fine.
Step in the right direction.
Yeah.
So how is then... I'd love you to expand on how you found that online or virtual therapy has been 10 times better than you imagined. What are the, what's kind of changed your opinion about it?
It's just way more engaging than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
I thought it would be a bit cold, but it's actually much warmer than I thought it would be. And I suppose it's increased the pool of matches, hasn't it, between client and therapist, because when we were doing face-to-face it was you live in this particular community and there were this many therapists, whereas actually if you go onto the various therapy directories right now, you've got your choice of thousands of different therapists, so it gives you much more choice, I suppose. And the technology, things like Zoom and Teams kind of works really, really well.
That's good. So last question for you. One of the things that people have a bit of a hard time wrapping their heads around is this idea that connecting with a counselor, engaging with a therapist is very difficult to do financially. Obviously I know it's not free most of the time, but what are the things that you would suggest to people who might be worried about that, might be interested, but they are just, I probably can't afford it? What's the...
The first thing I would say is have a conversation with your counsellor. So although they might publish rates that they charge, etc., talk to them about your personal circumstances, because they will offer concessions. They will do kind of different pricing structures depending on whether you're not waged, or whether you're a student or whatever.
And this is directly with a counsellor? You don't have to go through a certain program or the NHS?
Talk to the therapist if you want to go private. Otherwise, go to your GP. GP can refer you through, I think it's called Talking Therapy now, the NHS system. It used to be called IAPT. quite a long waiting list depending upon the area. But again, there is free counselling available. There is a waiting list. But the NHS does offer talking therapists these days. So nobody should be sitting there saying, well, I can't get into therapy because I can't afford. Because actually there are still options. But you need to talk to your GP or talk to a therapist. Now, I'm not saying every therapist will offer concessions, but most do.
Right. So basically for people not to be shy about being very upfront about what they can't or can afford, and just asking. There's no judgment.
No, and
right?
don't use finances as yet another excuse not to engage in therapy.
Right.
Because that is a door that we can knock down.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good to know.
Okay.
Is there anything else? I know we've covered a lot of ground, and obviously we've got a lot more conversations coming together that dive into some topics a little bit more deeper. But is there anything else that, just for people that are like generally being initiated to this kind of conversation, is there anything that you'd like to leave us with as a takeaway, as a key things to remember, to consider?
Nothing greatly other than, I would say, don't be shy. Don't be shy. Don't be scared to talk to other people. People are a lot more accepting and understanding than you think you're going to be. Don't suffer alone. Don't suffer in silence. The overwhelming majority of us have some sort of mental issues going on up there. And actually, we might often feel there's a perception out there that we're the only ones and nobody else does. But I can absolutely assure people that everybody's got mental health issues. So actually, be brave and share, because actually it does bring huge rewards.
And just like the relief of not holding this secret alone, not suffering alone, I think is key.
Yeah, there's a huge release of actually just being able to be you.
Yeah.
And not pretending to be okay all the time, because that in itself becomes quite burdensome.
That's great. I think it's good food for thought. I'll be thinking about this chat.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. And obviously, we're excited to have you again at our table to keep this conversation going, because, again, talking is key, right? As we all learned today. So again, Nigel, thank you so much. Obviously, anybody that might be interested in your work can look you up. You have a website. You're on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
You're on Instagram. You're everywhere.
Put that on the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, we'll be able to pop it up in editing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.